The Phoenician vessels no longer sail the Mediterranean Sea, and the secret of their famous Tyrian purple dye was lost and just recently rediscovered. But no traditional association of the ancient craft possesses more absorbing interest for the modern student of the mysteries than that which links the fame of ancient masonry to the venturesome seafarers whose winged argosies visited at least 3/4 of the globe in the morning of the human record. This is indisputable. Freemasonry is not altogether oblivious of her debt to the brave Phoenician race, aside from the luster cast by particular characters of Phoenician origin and the infamy or fame to which they are due. The ancient charges, folks, especially tell us of the order's indebtedness to the Venetians, as the Phoenicians are quaintly denominated in the same naive language of medieval England, which calls Pythagoras Peter Gower. You didn't know that, did you? You've read about Peter Gower and you never connected it with Pythagoras. Medieval England called Pythagoras Peter Gower, and they called Euclid clerk and pupil of Abraham. Mr. Higgins says, the biblical association of Hiram, the great monarch of Tyre, Phoenicia's chief city, with his brother ruler of Israel, and the participation of the former in the construction of the wonderful Temple of Solomon, the story of which enters so prominently into the Judaic history, the Christian religion, the religion of Islam, and of the Brotherhood tradition, has been heard over and over and over and over again, and is better told in Holy Writ than it ever could be recounted in modern terms. And that which particularly interests me is the question of what profane science and mere archaeology has to show of the presence among the Punic peoples of that same great cosmic cult which overspread the whole ancient world and which was based upon the geometry of the universe and the secret worship of Yahweh, or Jehovah. See, the Bible prefers direct testimony, ladies and gentlemen, of a complete community of faith between the ancient Tyrians and their Hebrew cousins in the complaint of the prophet Ezekiel, until the apostasy of the former and their search after strange gods, the erection of a polytheistic pantheon. Now, if we examine the subject from a completely secular standpoint, without invoking the aid of sacred annals, we find an enormous fund of genuine evidence that the Phoenician branch of the Semitic race played the chief role in the distribution of the arts, sciences, architecture, symbolism, and religion from the ancient culture centers of India, Egypt, and Babylonia to the newer civilizations which were scattered among the isles and along the shores of the Mediterranean, as well as to the western coast of Europe, and most probably, as the evidence tends to indicate, prehistoric America. The assumption that the Phoenicians were nothing but pagan idolaters can no more be sustained in the face of modern research than could be the notion of God, Deu, and Bogu being three different divinities, instead of English, French, and Russian for the same almighty creator. The people of ancient Tyre, Sidon, Aradus, Byblus, Berytus, and other Phoenician localities spoke a language so closely allied to Hebrew that one must necessarily have been a dialect of the other. And it is absolutely true, folks, that if you claim a heritage, there must be a root in the language, or there is, and cannot be, is not a heritage. Early Phoenician and Hebrew alphabetical characters were practically the same, and all recorded lapses of the Israelites into idolatry were always into Phoenician idolatries, showing that basically these two peoples were but one and the same, differentiated into maritime and agricultural branches of the Canaanitish stock. The Phoenicians may have had many gods, but to the priest they were attributes of Jehovah, while the Hebrews had the distinction of a dogged adherence to the thought of a monotheistic deity, all in all, Jehovah. Phoenician remains found over the whole expanse of the continent of the ancient world, from Scandinavia to Ceylon, prove that this clever people studied the arts and superstitions of their foreign customers, and they manufactured for each the peculiar idols, amulets, and symbolic ornaments with the same commercial acumen which once sent cargoes of brass idols from Birmingham to India with every shipload of Bibles from Oxford. King Solomon's temple is shown by archaeology to have been a typical Phoenician edifice. Phoenician edifice, folks. A lot of people don't want you to know that, but that's exactly the truth. An adaptation which that race of clever architects made from the symbols the various nations had of the Jehovah cult. It must not be forgotten that what we today call Freemasonry was the religious science of the ancients, the state of the art of that day. Right or wrong made no difference. It was a symbolic reconstruction of the universe in all its parts, amidst which gorgeous furniture, imitating the host of heaven and the powers and properties of nature, splendidly robed priests and acolytes celebrated allegories of the great celestial cycles and the spiritual birth, life, and regeneration of man. The word man in Phoenician being Ish. Ish. And the symbology was always in the sun, spelled S-U-N. The greatest of all contemplations among the Phoenicians, said Mr. Higgins, who was one of the prominent experts, as evinced by their architectural remains not only in their homeland at the eastern extremity of the Mediterranean Sea, but on the sites of the numerous Phoenician colonies on the northern coasts of Africa, many of the Greek islands, and in France and Spain, was the so-called dual principle. The theory of the universe as a marvelous equilibrium between forces seeking to destroy and forces seeking to preserve it was the basis of all the Eastern religions, symbolized in different countries in different ways. Today, you know it as the positive and the negative, the yin and the yang, the male and the female. The Mongols employed the yin and yin symbol, the Hindus twin fishes. That's really what the twin fishes stand for, folks. The Egyptians, twin serpents and twin pillars. The Phoenicians copied the fishes, the serpents, and the pillars. But the greatest contribution they made to the brotherhood was in the prominence they gave the pillars. You see, they used such pillars on the porch of their great temple at Melkarth at Tyre, and copies thereof wherever Punic settlements were effected. The modern Mason can recognize these pillars in his lodge, and they were the two pillars flanking the entrance to the Temple of Solomon. They were not original, they were copied from the Phoenician temple in Tyre. The worship of Melkarth was something which has had most consequences in the distribution all over the world of peculiar rites and mysteries bearing upon the existence of what they call the divine spark in man and its survival of the grave. That's the principle that they use to convince their initiates that man is God. It is the Luciferian principle. Melkarth is said to have meant king of the city of Tyre, and was identified by the Greeks with Hercules, because like Hercules, he was an incarnation of the solar principle of the sun and was afflicted in some peculiar manner by each of the 12 signs of the zodiac, which lay in wait to slay him. Melkarth was also called Baal, the Lord, and Adonai, the Lord, which means exactly the same thing. The Adonai above was the spiritual prototype of the Adonai below, and the Phoenician mysteries showed the blameless life, tragic death, and glorious resurrection of the being as an example to mankind. All of the Phoenician symbolism shows that wheat and grapes were the symbols of matter and spirit in this connection. Joseph's dream of the baker and butler was but a Phoenician allegory of the death of matter and survival of spirit. Good night, and God bless you all.